Dear Earthmates, we are visiting Mexico, and our host is Jennifer Clement, leading novelist, and she was also our PEN International president for 2 terms. And we, all PEN members and non-PEN members in the world, we owe you a lot, Jennifer. Thank you so much for all your wonderful contributions, leadership.
Well, thank you. That's very kind of you to say that. Thank you.
How did you fall in love with literature?
Well, I guess there were sort of 2 things that happened. I was raised in Mexico, and my father was a very literate man. So as long as I can remember, he read poetry to me. He knew poetry by heart, and Shakespeare, monologues from Shakespeare, he knew by heart. And then I had the sort of extraordinary good fortune that we lived very close to a British school. In those days in Mexico, the education system was, it hadn't really even been established. There was sort of no Ministry of Education. Everything was pretty chaotic. So if you could, you would try and go to one of the foreign schools. There was a German school, a Swiss school, a French school, a British school, an American school. And I went to the British school. And so it was kind of a very classic old-fashioned education where we studied, literature. And we started, with Nordic myths, and we did Beowulf, and we did Chaucer, and we did them all. And we also studied Latin. So I had a very good literary formation. And at the same time, living in Mexico, I was very in touch with what was happening in Spanish. And in fact, at the British school, other famous writers, their children went to that school, the most famous being Gabriel Garcia Marquez. His children were my classmates. And so, there was a very sort of rich foundation, both in literature, very much British literature as opposed to American, and Spanish literature. So I was fortunate in that formation. I don't hear you. There's something happened.
Sorry.
Okay.
Marquez is well read and respected in Turkey as elsewhere. And out of curiosity, any anecdotes with their children, with his children? I mean, what were your impressions? Or when you look back, have you?
They're still my friends today. They're still my friends. I guess my impression would be that we were all very politically awake. So we were very aware of the revolutions that were happening in Latin America. We were very aware that Gabriel Garcia Marquez was in exile from Colombia. We were also extremely aware of his closeness to Fidel Castro because they would be going to the island frequently. And we were listening to all the revolutionary music that was coming out of Cuba. And of course, we had friends that were exiled from Chile and exiled from Argentina. And I don't know, we were in a way, I would say, even in my memory, I keep saying, but really we were so young. And yet we were extremely already very politically aware. I mean, I even remember in Mexico, it's very difficult to get books, but there was this one bookstore where they had books from abroad and that would come by boat, by the way. And they allowed us to read the books without buying them, which was fantastic. And so I remember, trying to understand Marx, for example, but at a very young age, sort of trying to understand what was happening, because the school was filled with people in exile. And there was a real sort of sense of being politically awake to the moment. my father was also very, very politically involved. He was part of the civil rights movement in the United States. So when he came to Mexico, when the Kennedys came to Mexico, when John F. Kennedy came with his wife, Jackie Kennedy, the people that received them were my parents. So, you know, even on that side with my father, he was also very much involved in politics.
That's very important. I have difficulty in understanding writers in general who say they are not interested in politics, because that's a political stand as well. And I think one who says, you know, that person, I'm not interested in politics, to me, it means you can do whatever you want with my life. I mean, I'm yours and play with my life as you wish, saying to the government. Yes. And I remember this, one of the very few things about Mexico is poor Mexico, so far from God, so near to the United States, which is striking, the satire there.
Yeah.
The Zapatista movement is still strong?
Okay, so that's a complex question. There are still today, or were created from, we can call it a revolution, and we in Mexico think of it also as very much a poetic revolution, because Subcomandante Marcos, his whole communications were always very poetic and very beautiful. So there are today parts of Chiapas where you can't enter that are held by the Zapatistas. So if you wanted to go there, you would have to have special permission and understanding to enter those areas. So there's still, it's still, I mean, there were fruits from it, which are incredible. I mean, now within the Constitution, there are protections to indigenous rights and things like this, which have become extremely important. In fact, to bring it back to Penn, I mean, the first Penn Center in 100 years was founded in my last year as president of Penn International in Chiapas. And the writers in Chiapas were very concerned that all the indigenous groups be represented, because there are about 13 strong indigenous languages in Chiapas. And so they chose to call their Penn Center Centro Penn Pluricultural, which in English would be like multiple cultures within our center. And that is also a consequence of Zapatismo, for sure, you know. So it's been very important, and even though it may not be on the radar so much, in that part of Mexico, it's still very alive.
Mm-hmm. And why novels?
Why novels?
Mm-hmm.
What do you mean, why novels? For me, writing novels?
Yes.
Well, I always think that first and foremost, I write poetry. Mm-hmm. And as we know, one of the beautiful things about poetry is that it has no monetary value. It's probably the last pure thing on earth, you know. You can't sell it. So, so I'm the most surprised of all that I can write a novel. So I didn't know I could do that. And then I tried, and I realized for some reason I was able to write characters. I was able to write plot, and I was quite surprised. But I must say that, you know, anybody who really reads my work will see very clearly that I enter the novel through poetry. I mean, I'm very concerned about how things are written, and in two books that, well, a lot of my books are books about that do have to do with things that matter socially and injustices and things like this. But I'm very concerned by the way it's written. That's my foremost concern is the way it's written, more than what I have to say. You know?
The succinctness in writing poetry and the usual detailed work in writing a novel, there may be tensions sometimes, but each author has a different way of dealing with such tensions, I guess. Who have been among your favorite authors, poets and novelists, starting with your earlier periods?
Yeah, so yeah, I think for all of us, those are such hard questions because you know, for example, I mean, I really used to love Pablo Neruda, for example, as a teenager, and yet now I like him less. I mean, I still like him, but I wouldn't say that I love him the way that I did, you know. So even your tastes can change as you go through life. But I mean, obviously, I mean, the books that really are unchanging, I guess, you know, would be Cervantes, for sure, would be Goethe, would be Shakespeare. I mean, unfortunately, what most people say, you know. In more contemporary literature, I'm very influenced by Latin American literature. I'm very influenced by Juan Rulfo, his novel Pedro Páramo. I'm influenced also by some of the writers from Argentina, from the poets from Chile, not so much Neruda these days, but maybe more Borges in many ways. So, you know, it's sort of, it's hard to say, you know.
Borges is also among my favorites. I mean, what a character.
Yeah.
Susan Sontag asks him in an interview, if you were on an island, which one book would you have with you? And he says, The History of Western Philosophy by Bertrand Russell. And Susan Sontag, and she says, but it's a superficial book. And then the reply by Borges is incredible. But then I'm a superficial reader.
Excellent.
Wisdom. Wow.
Yeah.
Amazing. And when they ask him, are you Borges? You know, seeing him in this, he says, sometimes.
Yes.
You know, what a personality.
Yeah, what a personality. Yeah, definitely. He's very, very interesting. I mean, I do like to see the intellect, you know, and so not just the sentiment and not just the lyricism. I do like to see the intellectual mind. That does interest me, you know. So.
Do you have times when you concentrate more, for example, a few months writing, then a few months reading or social life, or do you handle all of them, all of those areas almost simultaneously?
Well, I don't have a huge social life because I tend to be a rather solitary person. I would describe myself as being. I'm somebody who reads a lot and likes to be in quiet a lot. But I'm not always working on a book. And every time I finish a book, I always say, never again. That's it. I don't want to do that again. It's so much work. But when I am working on a book, I work in the mornings. So I usually wake up at 6 in the morning and work through to, depending, 10, 11, 12, depending how it's going and how I'm feeling. I don't really work in the afternoon. I'll read in the afternoon, but I find a kind of link between being close to the dream state and to that sort of place is good for the writing. I feel like I sort of connect to something that can disappear quickly during the day.
Mm.
So I like to work very early. Yeah.
Wonderful. Do you use pen or pencil and paper notebook, or do you start with the computer?
So I do both. So definitely, I love paper. I love pencils. I love paper shops, beautiful paper and the feeling of the pencil and sharpening the pencil. I love all that. So certainly the first draft is written by hand of most of what I do. And then I take it to the computer so that in the second or in the third and fourth drafts, I'm on the computer, but then I go back to the pencil because then I print the book, and then the next drafts of polishing and cleaning are all done on paper. And then once I clean on the paper, then I'll clean on the computer. But then I get away from the computer with the printed work. Yeah. So it's sort of different processes. But yeah, I don't give up the paper and the pen. I love that still. Yeah.
Yes, it gives a different kind of freedom.
Yeah, it does. I think so. Yeah.
Do you sometimes give creative writing seminars? Or?
Yeah, I do. I give creative writing classes. I do. Yeah.
And what do you recommend to aspiring young writers, poets and story writers?
What do I recommend? Well, I think that the most important thing, I think, for me as a teacher when I'm giving those workshops is I'm very concerned that every writer try and find their own voice. So often I'll give prompts and exercises, and in fact, the same one to the group, so people can start to detect, their own voice. That kind of helps, especially when you hear the other voices around. But I think the number one advice that I give is to read. I'm always a little bit surprised in these creative workshops that I've given over many, many, many years now, is how so often people think that they can be writers and not be readers. I think that you do have to know what came before, in what context you're writing, who you might be alluding to. And I'm getting concerned to see that this is sort of being dismissed in a way. And to me, it's very important. To me, tradition is important. What came before me is important. Reading is important. And only after all that happens do I think that, not that it can't happen sometimes, but in general, you do need to have an understanding of what came before you,
Are they making a film based on one of your novels? I think I read.
Well, there's one that was made. So I have a novel called Prayers for the Stolen, which is about the stealing of little girls in Guerrero, which is a state in Mexico. And actually, I had already done a lot of research. I mean, I had wanted to try to understand how the violence in Mexico was affecting women, because it was very much a male-driven story. We have, even in Mexico, a genre of literature called narco literature, and it's very much stories about men, and the women that are in the books tend to be sort of cliches, like, it's the suffering mother or the prostitute or the girlfriend, and they weren't really that interesting as women characters. And the same was true in journalism. In the news, all the stories tended to be about men. And so for the first 3 years, I was just interviewing a lot of women of drug traffickers, just to try and understand that world a bit more. And then I was told about these girls that are being stolen, and how the parents, mostly mothers, because these communities, there are very few men, because either the men have been killed or the men have left to look for work, or they've gone to the United States. So there's these communities only of women. And so because these cars were coming, big, SUV type of cars, were coming into the countryside to steal little girls to traffic them. And so the mothers were digging holes in the ground, which was like in their garden or in their patio or in the field, where they would hide their daughters in the ground. And once I heard about this, I sort of had two images. One was a kind of rabbit warren with little rabbits under the ground with their hearts beating like crazy, or it was like being buried alive also. And then that's when I knew that was the book I needed to write, about those most vulnerable women. So I wrote that book, and that book has been made into a movie. It's been a huge success in the sense that it was the Oscar-nominated movie from Mexico. It won two prizes at Cannes and 3 prizes at San Sebastian. And it's been winning in Athens. It won a prize. It won many, many prizes. It's only part 1 of my book, and it's on Netflix. So if anybody wants to see it, it's called Prayers for the Stolen, and it's on Netflix.
Wonderful. We'll watch it.
Yeah.
And your interest in pen, how did that start?
That started when I was very young. It's so strange, the twists of life. So I must have joined Penn Mexico, when I was about 32 years old. And I was just a member. And then I remember for a while I was on the women's committee, but there wasn't sort of a leader. There was just a group of women who used to be aware of what was going on in Penn. And then a really interesting thing happened. I was invited to go to Miami for the founding of the Cuban Center in Exile. And that document, curiously, is in our pen book, where you can see my signature that I was actually there for that. And I met Angel Cuadra and all these amazing writers who had been jailed by Fidel Castro for, Angel Cuadra, I think like 20 years. And so that was a very moving experience for me. And then Penn Mexico went through a very sort of unfortunate time where it was not really active, and there was sort of infighting in the center, as we know can happen. And so it was sort of, nothing had happened for a good sort of 8 years. And in the meantime, all these journalists were being killed in Mexico. And so somebody said to me, why don't you see if you can revive it? And I did. I have to say that in Penn Mexico, the rule was only 1 term for 3 years. And I actually really didn't do any literary events because the situation with the journalist was so bad. And as you know, Penn is you work pro bono, so you have your job and you have your things you need to do, and you have to decide, how much time can you give it. And so I realized that the center didn't have enough, resources to do anything but address the problem of the journalists. And actually, we achieved a remarkable thing, which I really thank Penn for, because I really do think it was one of these moments when Penn is at its best. So in those days, to kill a journalist was a state crime, and it desperately needed to be changed into a federal crime, because so often it was the criminals who were investigating their own crime. So you'd have a governor or a mayor or a senator or a congressman or, or woman who maybe had committed the crime than investigating the crime. And I have to say that Amnesty International had tried to change the law, and many of the journalist organizations, CPJ and Article 19, and it was really Penn that managed to make it happen. Because one of the things that can sometimes happen in Penn, not always, but sometimes, is that we can bring this body of worldwide intellectuals together to create pressure. And it also depends on whether a government is affected by shame or not, because many governments have no shame. And fortunately, in Mexico, shame still exists. And so maybe it's starting to disappear, as it is sort of everywhere. But so, it was every president from every center, all the people who had won both the Nobel Prize in Literature and also the Nobel Prize for Peace, the Swedish Academy, many, many important writers. Everybody came together to pressure the Mexican government. At that time, John Ralston Saul was the president of Penn International, and I was president of Penn Mexico together. We went before the Senate, the Mexican Senate, and we really stated the case that this law needed to be changed, and it was changed. So I feel that was, really a wonderful thing that happened, and it was amazing to see how the whole Penn community came together. Now, I have to say that sadly, we haven't seen any effect of this law. So far, it's only a symbolic change, but as writers, we know that symbolism is important.
Indeed, indeed. Once that value is there, more and more, yes, the influence can be bigger.
Yeah.
And then you became the first woman international president, and we celebrated our 100th with you.
Yes.
And of course, Penn International presidency means a lot of dedication, time-wise and spiritually as well. What are some of the anecdotes that you would like to share?
Well, I think the first thing is just a complete surprise that happened, and that the way it happened, and never even crossed my mind. But I think because of the work of Penn Mexico, I suddenly received these letters, nominating me, and I accepted, and it was, very, very moving to me, I have to say. So I think the organization was really ready to have a woman president. The candidates were 3 women. So any of us who had won, we would have been the first woman. And so to me, it's a real reflection of the moment, that it had to be, a woman president. And so I just felt that I couldn't ignore this moment, that I had to really address being the first woman, that I couldn't just continue as though that had not happened. So certainly, I think for many women within Penn, we were all, I think, quite aware that the charter needed to be changed, because the charter said that that members of the organization would combat hatreds of class, race, and nationality. And of course, hatred of gender is so huge. It's probably bigger than those 3. And, I think it was, anytime I would read the charter, it would be like, and what about that hatred, So it took 2 years to change it. And I'm glad that it took so long, because it was something that needed to pass unanimously. I mean, everybody had to be in agreement. It's such an important document. I didn't want it to pass just with, 60% of the vote or 70% of the vote. So I actually, the first year where I tried to give the reasons for changing, there was controversies about that idea, and I withdrew the document. And then we worked on it some more. And I'm happy to say that it passed unanimously in Ukraine, by the way, in Lviv. And so now it after all this 2 years of debate and everything, it says all hatreds, that members of PEN will work to combat all hatreds. And the word equality is now in the document, because of course in 1921, nobody was thinking about equality. It wasn't on anybody's mind, but now it is in the charter. So I think, I'm very happy that that happened. I think it was important. And then the second thing that I would say, this is more about sort of milestones that I see as opposed to fun anecdotes, but was to create the Women's Manifesto. And that really has been, something so unbelievable to me. I can't even sort of get my head around it, because it was a document created for PEN, and it's completely transcended PEN. So the United Nations has taken it on as the heart of its gender work, as has UNESCO. It's been translated into all kinds of languages, even Zulu. Nicola Sturgeon in Scotland has it on the wall, framed in her office. It really has become sort of this document that's moving more and more. And in fact, Romana just told me, I haven't seen it, but she's the executive director of PEN International, that a whole evaluation was done on the gender work by this very important person who has worked. I don't know her name, unfortunately, because I haven't seen the document yet. But this person said that she felt that the Women's Manifesto was like one of the most important feminist declarations of the last 50 years. And the reason, I've had to think a lot about why. You asked about poetry at the beginning of our talk. And again, for me, the manifesto, and I worked on 2 manifestos as president. One was the Women's Manifesto, and one was the Democracy of the Imagination Manifesto. And in both those, there's great care to the language. That the actual wording should not be like by rote human rights language that we're so tired of hearing, or maybe tired isn't the word, but maybe overused. So it's like you almost don't hear it anymore. And I think what happened with the Women's Manifesto, which is unique, is that a lot of feminism is very angry. And the Women's Manifesto is a work of sorrow. And I think that that sentiment is not so common. The sorrow of the loss of women's imagination, of women's intelligence. What has humanity lost? And the document is about that very much. And it ends with that, with the loss. So I think that was different,
I try to encourage everybody to write, especially girls, women. And I say, okay, I was brought up by my mother, and I consider myself. Anyway, okay. I kind of enjoy saying that I consider myself an honorary woman because of my respect for womanhood. But even how can I express something that a woman only, there are things only women can express, I think. And womanhood, problems of women, that they are too important to be left to men. So more people, more girls, more women should write. It's
and also, one thing that's come up in my work recently, I have a book that just came out in Germany, which is a flaneur novel. It's a woman walking down the street and everything that happens as she walks. But it really made me reflect. I mean, in the Women's Manifesto, it says, there's no society that does not see with hostility a woman who walks by herself. And of course, the woman who walks by herself is the prostitute, right? And, when I look at the work of Borges, we talked about Borges. I mean, all his walks at night through Buenos Aires, they're famous, his walks at night. What woman can walk at night? I mean, Octavio Paz, he wrote many, many poems about his walks at night through Mexico City until the early hours of the morning. So I always say, Virginia Woolf said, a woman needs a room of her own, but she also needs a street of her own. I mean, there's no place in the world that a woman can walk in the street. In the day, yes, maybe some places, not all places, but probably nowhere in the world can a woman walk at night as a poet to feel the sky, to feel the moon, to feel the different scents and feelings of what the nighttime is. And those walks in male literature are very special. And a woman can't experience that, So there's so many layers of things that happen, that people are, if you're not sensitive to it, you're not even aware. And I'm so happy that there's that sentence in the Women's Manifesto, because it's brutal. It's a brutal sentence, but it's a true sentence,
Yes. And honestly, I'd never thought of this, walking at night. Yes. It's one of the many things we men take for granted and without imagining.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
How about mythology?
Yeah. What about mythology?
It's wonderful. Such an exciting area.
Yes.
And Latin American mythology is also vivid. I know very little, of course, but most exciting. And how has your relationship been with mythology in general?
Well, I mean, in Mexico, are you speaking about the pre-Hispanic mythology of the ancient people?
Any mythology in the world. I mean, mythology in general and...
Well, I mean, we have in Mexico, I mean, in general, yes, I've studied the Greeks at school and all that famous Greek mythology that we all think about. Probably not so familiar with, sadly, with other mythologies, Turkish mythologies, for example, or Persian mythologies. But I mean, I was a very serious dancer at one time in my life, and I was in a company in Mexico where we did a lot of the dances of the ancient myths. And I remember I did the dance of the goddess of the moon, who gets dismembered by her brother and thrown. I mean, they're very violent, these myths. Well, myths tend to be violent, or that kind of mythology. But you could even consider, I mean, now I haven't really thought about this before, except through your question. I mean, some even artistic or literary movements have mythological aspects. I mean, surrealism, is very close to mythology and the unconscious and the collective, Jung's collective unconscious and all of that, So yeah, I mean, I'm interested in all of that for sure. Yes.
How about book fairs? Book fairs, of course, are like a kind of pilgrimage in a way for readers and writers as well. Mm-hmm. But during the past few years, unfortunately, because of COVID-19, hardly any book fairs have been organized, I'm afraid.
Or festivals or anything. Yeah. Yeah.
How are your relationship with your readers? I mean, how is your relationship with your readers? I mean, do they contact you or do they come to your book signing?
They come. I mean, I would say probably the relationship is a bit through emails. I'll get emails from readers. Yeah, I mean, it's sort of both. It's sort of both. It happens in both ways. And then, you know, as you know, because you're also a writer, there's always surprise things that happen, that because books, in a sense, once they're published, they don't really belong to you anymore. They're like their own life out there. In this book, Prayers for the Stolen, that they made the movie from, part 3, which is not in the movie, takes place in the women's jail in Mexico City. And one of the things that happened, because I would go a lot to the jail, I would say, I knew that the director allowed me to go and spend time there. And I started to notice very soon, very quickly, that the men's jail is next to the women's jail. And very quickly, I realized that nobody went to visit women prisoners. I mean, there would be great long queues to visit the men, and almost nobody would go and visit the women. And it was absolutely heartbreaking, because the women prisoners, you know, they'd do their hair and their makeup, and they'd get so excited that it was Visitors' Day, and nobody would show up. So I put that in the novel. And then I had this really amazing good fortune that you know, the novel was sold in many parts of the world, many, and the letters and letters and letters that I've got, that this is true everywhere in the world. I mean, this is true in places like Sweden and Norway and Finland and Denmark. Nobody visits the women prisoners. So these are strange readers, you know, so readers from jail writing to me saying nobody visits us either. You know, I never expected to have that readership, you know. So there's things that are very surprising that happen to you as a writer, that you just don't know, that you put like something out in the world that has a ripple that you never would have imagined, you know. Mm-hmm. So that was one experience, unexpected experience. Yeah.
I would never have imagined this either, honestly.
I know, I wouldn't have either if I hadn't written it, because I was so, you know, I was just so sad. And so I put it in the book, and then it turns out that's the way it is everywhere. Yeah.
Arts in general, literature and theater in particular, to me, they are areas of justice in a way. And as you mentioned, most people are unable to express their problems, their suffering, and so much injustice is committed all the time. Writers in general, beyond genres, I think it's one of our duties to be their voices, and as you have been doing. Mm-hmm. So there is, at least there is some sort of justice demanding and actualizing justice in a way. When you write something, when you become the scream. Yeah.
Well, I mean, what I used to talk about a lot in Penn, and, you know, it's one of the things that's so incredibly special about Penn, is that we honor the fact that literature can change societies, that literature can create change. And of course, in you know, relatively modern times, you know, the 2 centuries ago, and, you know, I mean, there's such classic cases, certainly. I mean, just to name, you know, Victor Hugo, I mean, is such a giant in this, you know, and his books changed the world. I mean, Les Misérables completely changed the way we look at poor people. I mean, he gave them dignity, and through his book, we can no longer not see dignity in the poor, you know. And then you take a book like Oliver Twist by Dickens. I mean, that actually changed laws, that book. I mean, we don't remember any journalism from that time. but we all remember Oliver Twist. And it was thanks to that novel that the child labor laws in the United Kingdom were completely transformed. So I really believe in this, that literature, for some reason, either it is able to access an empathetic part in the reader that journalism doesn't. You know, it has some sort of a value that definitely is different. And so, you know, I always thought it's maybe sounded kind of crazy to say, you know, literature can change a society, but I really believe that it can. And it's not even my belief. It's something that is true, you know. And I think this is what is so incredibly special about Penn, is the comprehension of that, you know.
True. There are, I remember having composition classes, and there are literary courses, literature courses, etc. Usually we are asked to, we are given a subject, a topic, and then we are asked to write. That's good, okay, but we could also do this maybe. We could invite all people in the world to send us their life stories or anecdotes, whatever, and then we could pass that material to not only youngsters, but actually to everybody. So those who wish to express but cannot, while we encourage them towards writing, we could also respectfully to their lives, we could also be their pen in a way. This is not a difficult thing, maybe, but I don't know if it's not much, it's not done so often, I think. I haven't done it. I'm saying it, but I have not done it myself.
But it's funny because what you're saying also has to do with in the discussions for the Democracy of the Imagination Manifesto, we had these kinds of talks about, like, who are you writing for? Whose life are you representing? And what we ended up saying in that manifesto, you know, because we took this very seriously, is that, and it has to do with a little bit with what you're talking about, is that we have that line in it that says that although we completely honor and believe in the imagination, and even in some of us, not everybody, but I do, I believe that there is a collective unconscious, that there are primary things that unite all of us, that are universal. So we had this line that said, we acknowledge that many have not been the ones that are able to tell their own stories. So it's important sort of to acknowledge that, you know, it's not necessarily that their stories were stolen, but somebody else told their story because maybe they weren't not educated, maybe they didn't know how to read and write, maybe they were slaves. I mean, the list is endless, right? But I think it is important to be aware of that not everybody has been able to tell their own story, you know.
True. And actually, in Turkey, some Kurdish citizens about 15 years ago in Diyarbakir, especially, they asked people who were tortured, who had been tortured, and they told their stories. Also, girls who are forced to marry elderly men, and some of them commit suicide. So they told their stories, and they invited 25 writers. I was included, And so I wrote, actually, I transformed the life material into literature. Actually, I gave an example, and then now I think that, yes.
Now you realize you have done it. Oh, that's amazing. And I also realized something that I should say, because I'm talking to you, that I led the largest mission in PEN's history, which was to Turkey.
Mm.
We had 3 presidents there, and a future president now is in the photograph outside the Silivri prison. So there's actually 4 presidents in that photograph. And I don't know how many vice presidents, and, you know, yeah, that was amazing. Yeah.
That was 2012, if I'm not mistaken. I was president of PEN Turkey then. And
no, was it?
Because John Ralston Saul was the president. And
no, this is when I was the president. Oh, no, you're talking about the mission beforehand. Oh, yeah, there was a mission beforehand. Yes, of course. And
yes.
Others with Arthur Miller and whatever. Yeah,
oh,
yeah.
Yes, that's right. Yes. Yes.
Anyway, poor Turkey. One thing I said when I was there is, and to the newspapers, but nobody published it. I said, it's incredible how Turkey has a literature of prison.
Oh, yes. That is true. It's a fact.
It's a fact.
It's a fact.
Yeah. I have to say, back to poetry that I love. I mean, I'm reading in translation, so I'm always a bit nervous, but that poem, Things I Did Not Know I Loved, I mean, it's so amazing. That Turkish poem, Hafiz, how do you say his name?
Oh, Hafiz, that was...
oh, that's Persian, I'm sorry.
But there's Nazım Hikmet.
Yeah,
Nazım yes.
Things I Did Not Know I Loved. Oh my God, that is such an incredible poem.
Yes.
I think it's one of my favorite poems. Top 10, definitely. But I'm reading it in translation, so I'm always a little like, oh, you know.
His use of Turkish is really wonderful.
Yeah.
What are your wishes about the future of the world, let's say?
Well, I think that my wishes are like the wishes of all of us. I mean, peace, of course, really deeply concerned about what's happening with the environment. This is a huge problem, and we need to come together about this. One of the things that we were talking about in my last year at Penn was, you know, of addressing the amount of journalists covering the destruction of the planet that are being killed. I mean, the numbers are absolutely shocking. So of course, I think I have the concerns that, you know, most people who are caring and worried have. You know, I don't think they're unusual concerns. I would say, you know, peace and the planet. What are we going to do? You know,
true.
How can we come? I mean, one of the things, an amazing anecdote, was that as Penn president, I met the Dalai Lama, and in the north of India, in Dharamsala, and it was so wonderful because the Penn Tibetan Center, I said, I want to come, and they said, well, we don't know when. And I kept saying, what is it that they will not give me a date? And I said, well, anytime, but tell me when. No. So then when I got there, I said, what was this all about? And they said, oh, it's because we had to talk to the astrologers to see when it was a good time for you to come. So obviously the astrologers knew what they were doing, because I met the Dalai Lama and I was with him for an hour. And I have to say it, it's an anecdote. He held my hand for an hour. I kept thinking he's going to let go of my hand, but he never did. But he said, nothing matters anymore. All that matters is the planet. He said that the Chinese government has moved all the rivers that went into India toward China, that India is going to have a terrible water crisis beyond belief. And he said, I've cared about all these things, but they are all secondary now. We must come together and save our planet.
Yes, true.
And to do that, we can no longer think about borders, because a butterfly doesn't know about a border. River doesn't know about a border. The air doesn't know that this is Texas and that is Mexico. I mean, so there has to be a completely different change of thinking, which of course, when we see what's happening with Putin, it's archaic and evil and we have to change. We cannot think of borders anymore.
That's right. That's right. There are a lot of wonderful initiatives, organizations, local and international, and the Earth Civilization Network, which I mentioned, is one of them. I'm not saying it's wonderful. It's still at the beginning, but to give the name of our planet, Earth, we need a better civilization based on the awareness of the limitations of our planet and the possibilities of better synergy.
Exactly.
And, all else, that's secondary.
It is.
But unfortunately, this is very simple, but not many still, despite COVID, not many people still not aware. And
well, what we need to do, and I tried to sort of implement this in Penn, but I need to really get lawyers on board or whatever. But we do have to have a universal declaration of the rights of this planet. In The Hague. I mean, at that kind of level, just like the Universal Declaration of Human Rights, we need to create some sort of legally binding document where you are accountable to a world body of a law that we all sign on to, But we see what has happened with the Paris Agreement, people come and go like it's not important, and so I don't know what it's going to take, but it's the number one issue at this point.
Yes. Dear Jennifer Clement, would you like to say would you like to add?
No, just thank you so much for inviting me. And just to say that to have been president of Penn International was a great honor for me and a great blessing. And I guess that's it.
Thank you so much for accepting the invitation to become our international president.
Thank you.
For your dedication. And we're on the same planet. We're together.
Yes, we are.
Yeah. My best wishes.
My best wishes to you too. And maybe we'll see each other soon.
Yes.
Maybe in Sweden.
Yes.
We'll see. Okay. Take care.
Take care.
Bye-bye.